So I hope by now you have a really good understanding of how to do some basic modeling in Maya and also adding lights and cameras and materials to your scene in order to create three distinct um, two-dimensional works of art, 1280 by 720, um, as a way to reinforce what we've gone over in this set of video tutorials to give you a really basic introduction of working with Maya for 3D modeling. I have here a kind of final scene that I don't necessarily think is art has much artistic merit, but so please do think a lot about composition as you're kind of creating your three distinct scenes to render out. Um, but this scene I have saved, and just to go over this one more time, we want to make sure that we have a project set in our project folder. So my demo folder is where my project is set. And let me go back up one here. I have already set it to this demo folder, and that I also have created my project window. And what this will do is it will save my scene here um, to the scenes folder in my project folder. And also when I export out my images, it's going to save it into the image folder that I've created. So everything is really well organized in my Finder. So I'm able to, if I ever need to, transport my entire project to from one computer to the next, all of my documents, all of my images, all of my scenes, if I ever have textures in the future, will all be saved in the same kind of format. So I'll be able to kind of carry that over without losing any of my data. So just remember to, and also this way you know where your scenes and where your images are being saved to and not being saved to some default folder that gets created when Maya is installed on your computer. So now I'm going to go ahead and render out my scene. Before I do that, I did drop in a kind of background plane here. And I'm in my camera one, and I'm going to lock my camera one view so I can't move it. And let me go ahead and look at my perspective view. So you can see here that I've created a kind of plane, and I've given it a Lambert shader that's a blue kind of color because um, it's nice to have to consider the background, especially if you're creating 2D flat images that we're rendering out as like potential 2D works of art, that you want to have some, you don't want to just have like black background unless you really want to have a black background, then that's fine, but it's something that you need to consider aesthetically. And so if there's a couple different ways that we can kind of address the background for this first assignment to make an abstract couple abstract images. So in this case, I've dropped a plane in here. I've made a poly primitive plane, and I've increased the size and rotated it. And so this way, when I'm looking through my camera, it floods my camera view in the background and gives me some kind of a little bit more of an interest in the background, some kind of visual interest. Now, something else that I want to kind of mention about this background plane, and it's something you can play with, are some of the shadow properties here. So let me go to my plane. And if I go to my render stats here, I can turn off this receives shadows option here, and this will turn off the shadows that that these objects will cast because of the placement of the lights. Because the plane itself is an object, it can receive shadows, and so maybe I don't want to have shadows in my background scene. I don't want to necessarily refer to this plane as a kind of object. I don't want it to be able to receive shadows, so this is something I can turn on and off. You can do this for any of your objects. You can turn them off to receive shadows or to cast shadows, so this is something that you can kind of play with here under these render stats for each of your objects. Another way that you're able to, so actually let me go ahead and bring up my render view. I'll one more time go into my render settings here and make sure that under my common tab, I have my project 1, file 1 set here as my naming prefix, and it's a JPEG, it's a single frame, and it's this preset, and my renderable camera is camera 1. So that's all set. So now when I go and render out my image, it's going to save my image as a rendered JPEG at the right aspect ratio and the right file size. And it's going to save that to my image folder. So all of that is ready to go. So now I'm going to go to my render view here, and I've already rendered out my scene. This is what it looks like. And you can see here that I have shadows turned off. I'll show you what it looks like if I have shadows turned on here, receive shadows. So let me go ahead and just render it really quickly again. And you can see how this looks different when I have shadows being able to be received on that back plane. It's really your call. I mean, how you want your images to look. You know, it's a little bit of a different kind of question when we're thinking about using a 3D program to create a 2D image. You know, we're really thinking about this as the final output. So do I want my shadows? Do I like the way that this looks? Is this creating a little bit more of a dynamic kind of aesthetic image, or do I want it to have a kind of flat background? So really that's up to you. The other thing, so this is what it looks like with the shadows. So if I want to test another way, we've done the Arnold render view, which is a nice way to kind of maybe place lights and place materials on your objects in your scene, and to kind of test it in real time with the interactive preview. But now that we are actually going to go ahead and save our images out, render them out, using these settings here, using this basic render view is kind of the way to go. But I'm able to kind of take a snapshot also of this, so I can see if I like to have shadows here, and that I can do by pressing this button here. This will keep the image, and now I have this scroll bar that pops up, and so now this image just temporarily in my render view has been saved, so I can go and turn off receive shadows and re-render the entire image and say, okay, do I want to have shadows on that back panel, or do I want to on that back polyplane, or do I like it better if it's, or does it look better if it's flat and renders, appears more like a just kind of background hue. And I think I like it without shadows. I'm going to leave it without shadows. And just so I can kind of compare and contrast those two images, let me go ahead and take another snapshot, and now I'm able to see what it looks like with shadows and without shadows. And I definitely like this particular image better without shadows. The other thing is I'm getting a little bit of a kind of specularity noise on this cylinder, and it's something that I want to address. I don't think that this looks particularly nice. So a way that I can, instead of continuing, because this here it takes 30 seconds each time to render my image, so I don't necessarily, just because I'm going to go in and kind of using that reference guide for reducing noise when rendering an Arnold, I'm going to use that as a guide to go ahead and try to reduce the noise, but I'm only getting noise in this one little area. I don't want to have to render the entire image out every single time, take 30 seconds each time. So what I can do is I can just drag a little marquee box around the area that I want to do a test render of before I re-render the entire scene. So I can kind of drop in this little box here, and then I'm able to just render using this icon, using this option here. I'm able to just render this region of the image. So let me go back to my render settings here. I can access it with this clapboard with a gear, or this one up here. And let me go into my Arnold Renderer tab. And what that reference guide kind of has mentioned is that we want to be working within these parameters, and you can kind of take a look, and if you bump all of these up to each individually, they're at a low kind of number here, but let's go ahead and bump up the specular to 10. Okay, so what this is controlling are the amount of rays that are cast to be able to determine this renderability. And wherever you see this noise, it's like on that one particular spot, it's not able to compute kind of how to render that out. So you get this kind of noise, and it depends on the amount of rays. And so you want to kind of troubleshoot by increasing the rays within each of these particular parameters and specifications, but kind of do it one at a time, because it becomes very computationally costly to, it just takes a lot longer to render with the amount of rays that you increase for each of these. So some standards are, right now we have the camera AA is pretty low. I think that my image looks pretty good, but a kind of baseline recommendation for cameras is somewhere between 4 and 8 to get a really nice image, and then to go into each of these specific parameters for the rays and increase them based on what kind of noise you're getting. So I believe I have kind of specular noise here. So if I increase my specular rays up to 10, let's see what happens if I just render out this one particular region of my image. And you can see it takes a lot longer to process as it's rendering this region. But that noise is now gone. Let me go ahead and take a snapshot and we can see the difference here between this, this amount of rays for specular and now this. So it really is a kind of noise based off of a kind of direct or indirect specularity. So by increasing those rays, I've decreased that noise, okay? So for wherever you have noise in your scene, use this render region option to troubleshoot how to get rid of the noise, and then use that setting to render your whole scene. The last thing I want to mention is if I don't want to, I can use an image plane, but I'm also able to just kind of render out a flat background color. And I can do that in my render settings here. If I go under environment and I add a background here, I add an AI ray switch. So I've gone ahead and using this checkerboard, I am holding this down and I say create a ray switch shader. And now I have this little node, this little icon here, which will bring me to that node. And it's already actually popped up in my attribute editor. So let me go ahead and under this ray switch, under camera, I can change the color of the background that the camera shows. So let me go ahead and maybe use a kind of yellow just so you're able to kind of see it. Now I have a yellow as the background. And if I want to just preview what this looks like, I can go back to my plane here and let me turn off my plane. So just so we can see what this looks like, go to my perspective view and channel box layer editor and turn off the plane. And so if I go ahead now, let me look back through my camera one perspective. My plane's been turned off. I didn't delete it, it's still here. Go back to my render view and let me render maybe just a region of it just so it doesn't take so long. Actually, because I'm testing this, let me bring my specular. Now that I've troubleshot what this noise was from, let me bring this back down to 2 so that as I'm kind of previewing this render, it's not going to take like, I don't know, 4 times longer, 5 times longer to render. Let me render the entire scene again, and you can see that we have a kind of like yellow, flat yellow color that is being rendered in the background. So that's another way that you can add not necessarily an object to the scene that has a material on it that adds color to your background, but you can kind of flood the background with any type of color that you choose by using that ray switch. So, you know, I don't like the way that looks. I think the blue plane looks more interesting, and I like the way it kind of, the spotlight has adds a little bit of dimensionality to that plane. So let me go back and turn back on my visibility for that plane and render it out one more time. Make sure that, oh, if I want to stop the render, I can hit escape and that will stop the render. Usually, sometimes if it's taking a long time to process, it might not recognize your escape, that you've pressed escape right away. Let me go ahead and bump this up to 10 because that is the final parameters that I want to set my rendering sampling to. And so now I'm ready to go ahead and render this out. And so I can one more time hit this clapboard to render the current frame in this preview render view. But if I'm ready to go, I can go ahead and say render sequence. And this render sequence button, because my render settings are set to a single frame here, and I have all of my render settings are set, I can go up and say render sequence. So now it's not only rendering it in my render view, but it's also saving it as a JPEG to my Finder. And so this is the final process for this first project. And so we can watch it kind of happen here. And then we can look at it in our Finder. And that'll be it for our video tutorials for this week. So please, I hope along the way you've been really exploring and practicing in Maya, and develop 3 kind of distinct different images that are just an opportunity for you to reinforce what we've gone over for this week's module and this week's lessons. So here my image comes in, and just in the interest of time here, we can go to our Finder, and let me go to my documents here. And this is where my folder is, right, under demos and under images, and there it is. Okay, it's coming in, so I'm not going to have a preview here. It's not really ready, but we can see that there is my project 1, file 1 JPEG. And so if you, once you have all 3 done, just upload them to the project, the assignment folder on Canvas, and please have it done by Friday. If you need the weekend to work on it, you are more than welcome to, but I wanted to at least keep our course Monday through Friday kind of timeline each week. But if you need to have it carry over into the weekend for this first project, that's fine with me, but please have them uploaded no later than Sunday night. And also please share your images, maybe 1 or 2, or you can share all 3 in the discussion forum for this project, so that you and respond to your fellow peers, your fellow classmates on this online course, just so we can kind of see what we're all creating. Upload them and respond to the uploaded submissions from your peers, and have a great weekend, and I will see you virtually through these video tutorials next week. Also, don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions, or to set up a kind of virtual meeting through Skype if you need to. I'm here for you throughout this month-long course, even if it is virtually or remotely. So, happy playing around in Maya.